Welcome to the History Unplugged podcast, the unscripted show that celebrates unsung heroes, myth-busts historical lies, and rediscovers the forgotten stories that changed our world. I'm your host, Scott Rank. Hello, everyone. This is the second part in our two-part episode series on the Battle of Saratoga in our larger series on key battles in the Revolutionary War, where we left off. British General John Burgoyne, who is known as Gentleman Johnny for a good time with wine, women, and song, who also does not travel lightly in order to support the life of wine, women, and song when he's on the campaign trail, is having a lot of problems in his attempt to cut off New England and sever it so that it can be taken out piecemeal and the British can ultimately win the Revolutionary War. Plan isn't really going according to plan because they try to take a depot, doesn't work, a lot of Hessians are captured, they're moving much slower than they thought they would. Now they're going to come to a head and face a Continental Army. So, James, where are we at with the Battle of Saratoga?
So Burgoyne's supplies are continuing to dwindle. The army's morale is decreasing. They're running out of food. They're getting tired. And they're tired of having to constantly repair bridges and move trees that the Continentals have felled and things like that. Discipline decreased. And Burgoyne's Mohawk allies, we didn't mention them by name, but we did say that he had some Indians with him, and they were Mohawks. But they're upset about the lack of plunder. They weren't able to get the booty that they wanted because they hadn't run into the enemy really yet. So, except for the Germans, but the Mohawks weren't with them. So the Mohawks begin to loot farms along the way. They kill the widow of a loyalist, among others. But this widow was named Jane McCrae. And they finally just left the army. They said, we're done with this. The killing of Jane McCrae rallied many Continental militiamen to come out and fight. It was used kind of as a propaganda, scoring propaganda points. You know, the British killed this American widow, never mind that the fact the Indians actually killed her, and she was actually the widow of a loyalist. But nevertheless, as we know, propaganda, it's often more about what people perceive and what they feel based on the spin that's given to a story. That's more important than the actual facts.
Yes, absolutely.
So as the British army is dwindling in size, we saw that they lost a good chunk of their Germans. Now they've lost their Indians. They're having other people getting sick. The American army is actually starting to grow. People are coming out from their farms, their homes, and joining up. So Burgoyne's teamsters, the guys that drove the animals and the wagons, they were also looting farms along the way. So the British are not making any friends. They're going around killing civilians and stealing things. Burgoyne wrote later, my communications were at an end. My retreat was insecure. The enemy was collected in force, and they were strongly posted. But despite this, Burgoyne had repeatedly dislodged rebel forces along the way, just small minor groups that were there to more or less keep an eye on the British. So there seemed to be no need to retreat. Burgoyne could have retreated, and he probably should have at this point, but he just thought, well, no, we're the British army, by golly. By Jove. By George. Maybe he said by George. Who knows? But
that could literally be the case, yes.
Yeah, we're professionals, and the Continentals, again, are just a bunch of amateurs or farmers with guns, so we're going to keep on going. He decided to continue to Albany. On September 13th, Burgoyne and the army crossed the Hudson to the west side of the Hudson, near the village of Saratoga, and that's where the battle's going to get its name. By this time, General Gates, the American overall commander, he had 10,000 Continental soldiers, some militia, some regulars. And Burgoyne didn't know this. Burgoyne, of course, did not know exactly how many of the enemy were waiting for him. So he's going to have another nasty surprise awaiting for him. I'm sure he thought it was quite a few less than that. So that's going to bring us up to the battles. And before we jump into the actual fighting, I have to clarify one thing, make one thing clear, and that is that there's not a single Battle of Saratoga, even though we always talk about the Battle of Saratoga. The Battle of Saratoga is actually two separate battles that were fought on different days in different locations. Freeman's Farm is one, and then Bemis Heights is the second one. We'll go over those in some detail in a minute, but sometimes they're called the First Battle of Saratoga and the Second Battle of Saratoga. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that Saratoga is just the name of a village, but the actual fighting is going to be in two different places. But again, we'll go with, just like Bunker Hill is misnamed, it should have been Breed's Hill, but why fight it? Why fight a couple of 100 years of tradition? So we'll just continue to call this the Battle of Saratoga Part 1 and Part 2. Okie doke. Ready, Scott? Ready for the bullets to start flying?
I think so. I'm just interested that for what's happening here, it's almost it's like a battle of necessity on the side of the British. It's sort of a reverse of only 8 or 9 months ago, with Washington having to cross the Delaware because he's simply running out of time. So got to give it to the Americans. It took about 8 or 9 months to get their army back up to what it was before it completely melted away after the New York campaign. The pendulum swings back and forth quite a bit in the Revolutionary War. Yeah,
it really does. All right, well, let's do it. So south of Saratoga, the village, north of Albany, there was some high ground called the Bemis Heights. And there, Burgoyne collided with part of Gates's army. The heights controlled the path southward. There were heights on one side and the Hudson River on the other side of this path. It's sometimes called the River Road. This is so they're marching right down alongside the Hudson, and to their right, the British right, as they're coming down from the north. On the British right are the heights, and on the left is the river. The Americans were deployed in a redoubt designed by a Polish man, a Polish volunteer who would come over and, I'm going to butcher this one because I did not think to look this up. Thaddeus Kosciusko, I believe. Okay, and if I mispronounce that, folks, please forgive me. I don't know Polish. Yeah, I studied a little bit of Czech a long, long time ago, and they're similar, but not exactly the same. But the fact of the matter, regardless of how his name is pronounced, this Polish engineer had designed a very strong position. Burgoyne realized he had to attack it if he were going to continue to Albany. He can't just march past that and wave to the Americans and say, all right, I don't have a problem with you guys. I'm headed somewhere else. I'm just passing through. No problem, right? Because he would be cut to pieces.
Right. Very desperate situation for the British. I wonder with Thaddeus Kosciusko, how'd you say it?
Kosciusko.
I know Casimir Pulaski because he's more famous, and I live close to Illinois, which did have Casimir Pulaski Day to this day. Are we going to mention it later on, or should we just mention very briefly here the Polish involvement in the Revolutionary War?
I don't know that I talk a lot about that, so why don't you go ahead and talk a little? That would be fun.
I would, but to be honest, I've forgotten why. So if you know,
well, we'll have to do a bone up on it a little bit. They certainly had a significant contribution, but as individuals, I mean, we've seen, or we're going to see, there's going to be quite a few individual French soldiers come over and volunteer, even before the French jump into the war as a nation. And we're going to see Germans coming on the American side. We've already seen a lot of Germans on the British side, so Poles as well. Yeah, so I haven't looked at that lately, so we'll have to research and return. Come back on that one.
Yeah, listeners, we remember and forget things very quickly, so bear with us as we go on.
Both of us are constantly researching many different topics at one time, so forgive us. Plus, I wrote these notes about 6 months ago. I have continue to try to stay up on it, but we can't know every single detail about everything.
All right, so what does Burgoyne do in defense when he comes up against Gates?
All right, so here comes this redoubt, and Burgoyne divides his army into 3 columns. The left and center of the British army were to demonstrate before the redoubt. There's that word again, demonstrate, just to kind of keep them busy, while the right was to, guess what? Go around the side. Another flanking maneuver there. They were going to try to march around the side, hit the redoubt from the side and rear. The British right was commanded by a man named Simon Fraser. He's a colonel, I believe, at this point. They were surprised along the way by an American force under, guess who? Reader or listener? Okay, I think I heard somebody say Benedict Arnold, Scott. So Benedict Arnold, he's there, and he wants to fight. His blood is up. He had guessed what the British were trying to do. He had persuaded Gates to let him go forward and meet the British attack.
Yeah, and we're going to see here that this battle seems to be full of commanders that are led by two people who really don't like each other. So you have Burgoyne and Howe, and you have a similar thing with Gates and Arnold. There's just not much love lost between Benedict Arnold and Horatio Gates. The latter is in command of the Continental forces at Saratoga, and Arnold is his subordinate, but Gates doesn't like having what he considers to be a prima donna in his army. But he did retain Arnold because of his combat reputation. And we're going to see what role that Arnold has later on. Well, it's very interesting. I will not spoil it, but all that to say, there are commanders on both sides that don't get along, and you almost wonder if they're trying to sabotage each other more than the enemy.
Yeah, Arnold has already got a chip on his shoulder. He already has been passed over a couple times for Major General. He has a huge ego. Gates has a huge ego, both of them. So this is a recipe for problems. I'm not going to say disaster, but it's a recipe for a big problem. So for now, they're essentially getting along, but later on, things are going to go south. Arnold deployed Daniel Morgan's riflemen. We've talked about Daniel Morgan. He was the commander of a group of riflemen, very effective commander. And they were deployed at a farm that had been owned by John Freeman. So that's where the name of this sub-battle it comes from, Freeman's Farm, or First Saratoga, but we'll call it Freeman's Farm. They stopped the British assault, but they were themselves pushed back. The riflemen really, again, played a key role in this battle. They picked off a lot of British officers as well as men, regular enlisted men. And the fighting went back and forth 6 times, finally until the British disengaged. And so at Freeman's Farm, the British lost 160 killed, 360 wounded, and 40 missing. That's a total of 560 casualties. The Americans lost only half that many. So this is an American victory.
And that's significant because these are the Americans going toe-to-toe with the professional British, the hardscrabble patriots that we see at the very beginning of the Revolutionary War that are very ragtag and inexperienced. They're starting to shape it up a little bit because they slug it out with each other. And Arnold holds his ground until sunset before he retires his army in perfect order. So it's a bad omen for Burgoyne, but it also continues to strain the relationship between Arnold and Gates. Gates is jealous of Arnold because he doesn't have the battlefield success that Arnold does. So, yeah, things are...
Yeah, Arnold's extremely brave, almost to the point of foolhardy. Arnold is a man of action. He wants to get out there and, he's swinging his sword, and he's on a horse, and he's just really Mr. Combat. And Gates is more of a cautious, sit back and let the army run out there without him kind of guy. So, yeah, there's going to be some butting of heads coming up pretty soon. More soldiers keep arriving. So even as the British army is getting smaller, we've talked about the Mohawk leaving. We've talked about some of the Germans being killed or captured. People are always getting sick. Some of the British army are just melting away. They're just disappearing, running away, and trying to start a new life. So the British army is shrinking, even as the American army is growing. The American army, we already talked about how it had been up to 10,000. Now it's going to go even more than 10,000. So again, as you said, Scott, the Americans showed that they can go toe-to-toe with the British. They can fight off British assaults, even if they hit them 6 times. So now we're going to move on down to Bemis Heights. All right, you ready for that?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So a courier from Sir Henry Clinton, another one of those major generals he was with Howe at the time in New York City. The courier arrived at Burgoyne's camp, and Clinton offered to send 2,000 men in 10 days. Burgoyne must have said, 10 days? Great. But again, we have to once again mention that the travel is very slow and that there's not enough roads. So it's not like today when they could just put them on a plane and drop them off like paratroopers or something. They can't do that. So it would take quite a while. But even still, Clinton's force, they started moving, but they were delayed. Surprise, surprise. And Clinton's force essentially went north a little bit, attacked a few Americans, and returned to New York. So Didn't really do a whole lot. All right, it's time.